There's trade deals, there's partnerships, and then there's fighter jets. Emmanuel Macron and Mumbai have put the finishing touches on a 30 billion euro sale of 114 Rafales. This third batch comes as France struggles to convince its European neighbours to either buy its warplanes, build one together, or at the very least get NATO allies to de-risk from relying on US-made F-35s. On the Indian side, there's the scrutiny over how Rafale sales have gone so far, both regarding cost and combat readiness. And then there's the question of how much Delhi weans itself off historic supplier Russia. And what goes for military hardware, you could say goes for oil imports, what with US pressure to stop buying discounted crude from Moscow. On that score, what to make of fast-track trade deals with Washington, the European Union, and how much strategic autonomy for both India and France can they afford in a realigning world? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Emmanuel Macron's India charm offensive. With us from New Delhi, Mohan Kumar, India's former ambassador to France, former lead negotiator for his country at the World Trade Organization. Good to see it. Good to see you, even if it's by video link.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to join you.
From Bangalore, Deepa Olapalli, research professor of international affairs at George Washington University. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Great to be here.
Kumar Ananda is president of the France-India Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Happy to be here.
All right. And happy to see you again, Jean-Luc Racine, research director at the French Scientific Research Center, the CNRS, and also at the Asia Center think tank. Good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
Reminder, you can always, by the way, listen. That's right, listen to the France 24 debate, wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, it's Emmanuel Macron's fourth visit to India as French president since 2017, kicking off this time in the financial capital, Mumbai. The French president and First Lady first paying tribute to the victims of the 2008 terrorist attacks at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. Two of those 166 victims were French. Then it was on to the launch of an assembly line near Bangalore for Airbus to build H-125 helicopters, its most popular single-engine model. The maiden flight out of that factory could come before the end of the year, partnering with Airbus in India conglomerate Tata.
The inauguration of the H-125 helicopter assembly line in India is an excellent example of our shared trust. We are proud that India and France will jointly build the world's first helicopter that reaches heights from up to Mount Everest in India, and we will also export this across the world. India-France partnership knows no boundaries. It can reach from deep oceans to the tallest mountain.
Yeah, deepest oceans, Mohan Kumar, an allusion to submarines. How far can France go with this defense partnership with India at this point in time?
Thank you very much for having me. I think there is no other way to see this all-important visit to India except by way of a reaction from two important middle powers. I'm sorry to call France the middle power. I realize France is a much more developed country than India, but perhaps in geopolitical terms, you will forgive me for calling both of these middle powers. It is their reaction to geopolitical turbulence around them. That's the only way I see the all-important visit. The other paradigmatic shift that has happened in the Indo-French defense relationship is when I was ambassador in Paris, I would plead with my French interlocutors that stop just looking at it as a buyer-seller relationship, because India does not have a bottomless pit when it comes to dollars and euros to buy defense equipment. Why don't you start making it in India? I now see the first indication, solid indication, of France really announcing very important landmark deals in this visit. The first one is that the 114 Rafale, if it does come through, and I have no reason to believe it will not, almost 96 of them will be made in India, one way or the other, with at least 50 to 60% local content. Safran says they will make engines now in India. Bharat Electronics and Safran have agreed that they will start making hammer missiles in India. So you can already see a shift from a buyer-seller relationship to a relationship that is going to be based on co-designing, co-development, and co-production. This is exactly what India wanted from France. I do have to say that among all the 42 strategic partnerships that India now has, the most problem-free and the one with the maximum trust would have to be France and India. So all in all, I see this as a reaction to geopolitical turbulence. I see it as a reaction to restoring and reinforcing trust in the relationship. I also see this as a way for India to diversify its arms purchases.
But Mohan Kumar, a lot to unpack in what you just said. One quick question. I understand referring to France as a middle power, but India? Is India a middle power? It's the world's most populous nation now.
And we are a middle power. I mean, I'll be very honest. We have a huge population, but I dare say publicly, I'm retired now, so I can speak my mind. A 4 trillion economy does not do justice to a population that is 1.4 billion. The only country we can really compare ourselves is with China, and China is really far ahead of India. So I would have to say India is a middle power. We certainly hold a lot of promise, but the jury is out. So we will still have to make considerable progress before we are called a great power or a major power.
All right, Deepa Olapalli, we heard Ambassador Kumar say that you can't spend, but I see that India's defense budget for this year is up 15%. So it is willing. Why this? Why so much? And what's it all about?
Well, yes, thank you for having me here. Good to be here. This is India's biggest single military deal since independence. So clearly, you cannot underestimate the importance of this deal. And India is willing to pay up to $40 billion for this. So clearly, I agree with the ambassador that it's not a bottomless pit. On the other hand, India seems to have enough resources. It's a growing power, it's a growing military power, and it's going to keep buying. And I think ever since the 2025, the clash with Pakistan, and then before the 2020 Galwan clash with China, I think there has been a shift toward increasing defense spending, and willing to make the trade-off in other areas. Now, in this case, there is, of course, a lot of hype about this deal, and I would simply say that the hype is perhaps warranted, but I think there's a little bit of overhype because ultimately I do see it as being partly related to the fact that India's own state-owned company, HAL, was not able to deliver on its indigenous fighter jets. And therefore, India had very little option because they are now in a situation where they need to beef up their capability in the Air Force. And so the options, I think, were the other two would have been the F-35, US F-35, and the Sukhoi 57. Now, the US would have been much more expensive, and I think the Rafale is probably a much better performer than the Russian fighter. So in that sense, I think India wants the best fighter out there in a cost-effective way, and Rafale probably fits that. Now, will down the road, is there any possibility that France might try to de-risk by de-dollarizing and maybe, have something similar to the rupee trade that the Russians had in the defense and in the energy? I don't know that, but if that is the case, then there's a lot more, I think, in terms of affordability for India.
That Rafale fighter jet deal, not yet quite signed. Let's cross to Mumbai and correspondent Navodita Kumari. Before I ask you about that mega defense deal, Navodita, let's first talk about a public relations exercise, and you can take the word exercise literally. Emmanuel Macron drawing plaudits for going on a morning jog on Mumbai's Marine Drive promenade near the coastal road there, Navodita.
So yeah, Emmanuel Macron created a lot of buzz here in the Indian media as well as on social media with his video going viral. And we see Macron running, and after him there are a couple of security staff trying to pace up with him, with passerby. Not only, I mean, they're just going by the day, and they didn't even notice that there is a world leader jogging among them. We can't really blame them because it's Mumbai, it's where there are so many Bollywood actors and famous stars that they are used to for security staff following stars and cameras also following. So they might have been a little bit confused whether it's some Bollywood star, but in fact it was Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, of course a star in his own right.
A star in his own right, indeed. Navodita, still no sign of those Rafales, of the deal being inked as we speak, right?
Yeah, there was a bit of a speculation before the arrival of Macron, but honestly, we didn't get a sense since his arrival here that any big announcements are on their way. During the press statements, we heard both the leaders underscoring the fact that their bilateral strategic partnership is important to each one of them, and they talked about their partnership in innovation, technology, healthcare, as well as emerging technologies like AI, semiconductor. So, of course, there was no mention of Rafale deal. We understand that this is an ongoing negotiation going between the Indian Defense Ministry and Dassault Aviation, and they are going point by point, deeply negotiating intricacies of this deal. From Indian side, India is pushing for its made in India policy, where the Indian ministries, they want that at least half of these Rafale fighter jets be manufactured in India. So apart from that, it was not discussed during the press statement, but the leaders did talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine and West Asia, and that there is a need to find peaceful resolution through dialogue. And both the leaders also asserted on the fact that there is a need for a multilateral world order at a time where the world is going through so much geopolitical uncertainties. And the Macron and Modi call this partnership as a force for stability.
Navodita Kumari, many thanks for reporting live there from Mumbai. A couple of questions for you, Kumar Nanda. A Bollywood star is more recognizable in Mumbai than the French president?
I think what Macron probably would have done, he probably is the president that is today from France, been to India so many times, and he has done so much for the bilateral relationship for India. I think I have the pleasure to have
we saw those passerbys do a double take as they watched him go, though.
Yeah, I think he is popular in India because he's pro-India. At least now he's pro-India. Thanks to him, I think the relationship has grown up with India.
So why haven't they signed yet this deal? Because it was approved by the cabinet. So why isn't it?
I think the probably as part of the visit, there's an announcement that has come up, and the process is probably going to be lengthier. But I think what we probably need to understand what France is doing with India, just not about selling Rafales and selling aircrafts to India. I think what Ambassador Mohan Kumar said, we are moving away from a buyer-seller market. What France is building with India, it's more, let's say, a dual industrial capabilities in India. When you take all
But normally you iron all this stuff out before the visit, right?
But that, I think, the first clearance got in. I think there's one more clearance has to come. So I think it will take some time. But I think there's a hope that something will be signed in March. But let's hope for the best.
Jean-Luc Racine?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that it's not the first time that India was eager to buy more than 100 Rafale. The first step was in the early 2010s. And it collapsed because Dassault was not ready to answer.
This is the maker of the plane, the company that makes the plane.
If I'm not wrong, 136 planes were supposed to be, most of them to be built up in India. But HFL, Indian company, asked Dassault to guarantee what would have been constructed in India. And Dassault was not ready for providing this guarantee. So that collapsed. And finally, when Modi arrived in power, he decided 1 year after his arrival that finally he will buy 36, if I'm not wrong, Rafale ready-made from France. So it had a specific dimension that it seems that there is also another parameter that India has understood that asking for too much might be a problem for the defense industrial makers.
Now, we saw it was really the first time the Rafale was used in combat last year in those battles that took place with Pakistan over Kashmir. 2 Rafale jets shot down. Does that change the bargaining, you think?
But clearly not. Because, I leave aside what Trump said that the Pakistanis shot down 6, 7, 10 planes, including 3 or 4 Rafale. But this is a part of a balance. There was the problem of the clash between India and Pakistan, but on the other hand, even before the disturbance of Trump's second presidency, top officers in the Indian Air Force were repeating, we want more Rafale, we want more Rafale. Because they were considering that it was the best plane as far as their need was concerned, on the one hand. And on the second hand, of course, what they may have expected before from Russia has been a bit deflected because we were considering that, after all, the war in Ukraine was not a real testimony of big Russian modern defense. So there is, in a way, a lot of parameters, including the change in geopolitics.
So the Russians have underwhelmed on the battlefield, and that also is part of the mix.
So we have to pay attention to many factors,
including, as was said earlier by Deepa Lapali, the price-quality ratio.
Absolutely.
Which is also a factor in all of this. Mohan Kumar, it's been said that because there are these French fighter jets and these Russian fighter jets, that effectively India has to have 2 different air forces. That when they're fighting. That inside of the Air Force, you have a completely different kind of training according to which plane there is. In the long term, is that viable?
No, it's not. And I concede the point that there has got to be a fair degree of rationalization. I think that's what the Indian Air Force is doing. But frankly, my own sense is that we find France a very trusted supplier. There are no strings attached. There have been no problems in the past when it comes to supply of Air Force equipment, and the relationship goes back about 60, 70 years. So, for a variety of reasons, I find that India is rationalizing its supplies from France. I also think you have to situate this defense deal in the larger context of India-EU ties. I think the European Union is an economic giant, and if you forgive me, you are a bit of a geopolitical minnow. India, on the other hand, its geopolitical clout is rising, but its economic heft is not keeping pace with its rising geopolitical clout. The question now is whether France and India, EU and India, can help each other, but because at the end of the day, I suspect both EU and India fancy themselves as two important poles in a multipolar world, and both of them subscribe to strategic autonomy, multi-alignment, and a multipolar world. You cannot have a multipolar world if you don't have EU and India developing substantively as poles. I don't see it happening with Japan, South Korea, Australia, with due respect. So the jury is really out. If you really want a multipolar world, in my view, it's got to be the EU and India. My sense is India and EU are trying their very best, and that is why you found that in addition to the FTA with EU, we also signed a security and defense partnership with EU. That is important, even if it is symbolic, because I think the long-term potential for India to actually help cooperate with the EU to make it a solid defense establishment, and if Europeans can get their act together, Europe-wise on a defense thing, not just individual players like France, but also EU as a defense entity, then I think this dream of a multipolar world may not just be a dream. It may still be achievable. To me, it seems like that is the overarching strategic objective. But for the time being, I think the fact that the French are now willing to transfer technology. President Macron in the press conference an hour ago said, I understand there has got to be transfer of technology, quote unquote. That to me indicates the French recognize that Indians want Rafale aircraft and other equipment to be made in India with a substantial transfer of technology. I think that is going to be a game changer in my view.
Deepa Olapale, you do agree with that, knowing that, of course, one of the big issues is what happens after the sale. One of the big criticisms of the F-35s is that the software in them means that customers need to go back to Washington all the time and are dependent on the United States afterwards. But there's been a little bit of criticism of the French as well on that score when it comes to the Rafale.
Yes, I think that we have to understand the deal and the FTA and all the incredible movement as a reflection of what's going on in the global system, rather than seeing it as a long-term, necessarily a shift. But on your, in part because I think, just to go off your exact question, that the multipolar idea is in India's DNA, but I'm not at all sure that Europe as a whole really subscribes to that. So at this moment, certainly India can trust France much more than it can the United States. For one, France does not have end-use monitoring the same way that the United States does, where there are many more conditions attached to U.S. sales of defense equipment, including F-35. But the French are not exactly opening up its transfer technology either, because it is protecting the source code, the algorithms for the software. But I think that is something that no major producer is going to give away just like that. So I think that is probably not in the card. But that does mean that India has locked itself into a long-term relationship, which is in some sense basically a defense commercial relationship. But what I think is different with France and US is that India and France can probably withstand political conflicts, political disagreements, geopolitical disagreements that are bound to come up. Just look at what happened unexpectedly in Ukraine and Russia, and the way in which Europe and India distance themselves. So, but I do think that India is probably banking on the fact that the French also understand the Indian need for strategic autonomy, its need for a certain amount of political space, even as commercial defense is something that they want, and they're not going to let that go very easily.
All right, and there's certainly the balance of power between the two is not the same. The French press talking of major concessions on the part of the French in stealing the Rafale deal. Stating, this is an article from newspaper Le Monde that says that France appears to be leaning towards buying the Indian Pinaka system to renew its fleet of multiple rocket launchers, which is nearing the end of its service life. But the Indian MRLs seem less effective in terms of accuracy and range. But if that's what it takes to sell 114 Rafale fighter jets, Jean-Luc Racine, then that's what it takes.
Yeah, there is a kind of debate about those Pinaka missiles. It seems effectively that, one, it's not the top of what could be found on the world market. And second, the Indian missile would not be connected with a NATO weapons system. But if it's the price to be paid for the sale of Rafale,
yeah, again,
this may explain that.
We're talking about a 30 million plus euro deal. Of course, India, its strategic autonomy is always on display. This is the land of non-alignment. It could be France one day, Russia the next, who sees its leader come into town. The same Narendra Modi, who welcomed Macron, rolled out the red carpet just 2 months ago for Russia's president, signing plenty of memorandums of understanding on issues like migration, mobility, health and food security, maritime cooperation, and fertilizers, to name a few.
Talks on key global and regional issues confirm that the positions of the two countries are aligned. Russia and India pursue independent and sovereign foreign policies. Together with like-minded partners in BRICS, the SCO, and other countries of the global majority, we are advancing efforts to build a fairer and more democratic multipolar world order.
Here's the interesting omission in what happened in December, and this speaks to what Jean-Luc Racine was talking about earlier. There were no defense deals between India and Russia last time. Why is that?
I think after the visit, there was no major deal announced, while Russia remains one of the key defense arm provider to India. But I think what India is doing probably, I think, as I said, India's no more non-aligned but multi-aligned, of course, for aiming for strategic autonomy. And
is India quietly withdrawing from its dependence historically on Russian military?
Yeah, I think when you see what has happened in the last 1 month, I think on the Russian oil, I think we see that India finally is decreasing its purchase from the Russian side and diversifying its sourcing, its procurement. And India today, it always operate as making deals to each country, deal specific, on content specific, and they always do the best for the country. I think it's a large population that you need to take care, and the way they are approaching, let's say, the global dynamics, the geopolitics today, it's what is best for me and with whom I should do the deal, and then I move on. And of course, the global compliance pressure that pushes, of course, Indian corporates to do the best deal for the country. But you see it's all volatile, and it's anything, context changes, decision can change. So stability is something that is, of course, of importance for India. But the history is also important. The historic relations that India has built with certain partners, they don't want to give it up for a change of context that might happen today with Europe. So when you see what France has built over the last few decades, and while we focus on the Rafale, I think on the larger industrial scale, what France has accomplished in India is quite amazing in terms of when you take all these industries, Airbus, Thales, Safran, and Dassault, they are building a very large capability in India, not just for India, but for providing for other nations.
And this, despite the language barrier, is it a big problem? You compare to like nations?
Language barriers, I think when it comes to money and defense, there's no language barrier.
At the Munich Security, you mentioned there oil. At the Munich Security Conference this past weekend, India's foreign minister crossing paths with his U.S. counterpart, Marco Rubio, stating that, quote, in our conversations with India, we've gotten their commitment to stop buying additional Russian oil. Subramanyam Jaishankar not at all confirming that assertion. That said, as was just stated there by Kumar, the International Energy Agency noting a downturn in purchases of that discounted Russian oil by India, 1.1 million barrels a day in January. Moscow, by the way, instead selling that crude to China instead of India. So, Ambassador Kumar, let's cut to the chase here. Is India more annoyed with its dependence on Russia for military matters, or with the United States, which is pressing its hand?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is that when it comes to Russian oil, there is a perfectly logical explanation. You can talk of pressure from external sources, but the fact of the matter is, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, India imported exactly 0.2% of its oil imports from Russia. That's the truth of the matter. Following that, Europe, I think, imposed sanctions on Russian oil, although you continue to merrily buy as much gas as you want from Russia, but I will leave that aside. But the fact is, following the imposition of sanctions or Europe's decision not to buy oil from Russia, Russian oil prices crashed. So India had a huge advantage in buying oil from Russia because the differential between Brent crude and Ural crude or Russian crude was huge. As of last month, I was checking, the difference is hardly $2 or $3. So frankly, now India has no great interest from that perspective in buying Russian oil. Because frankly, the differential does not justify buying. So I would say the reduction in the purchase of Russian oil is also due to this differential between crude oil of Brent and Ural coming down. As for our dependence on Russia, in my conversations with the retired army generals and others, what I'm hearing is the legacy dependence of India on Russian platforms and Russian weapons will continue for 10 years or so. And that's just the way it is, because I think deep inside the West will understand, Western countries will understand that this dependence was actually caused by sanctions from the West. India had no choice but to buy weapons from Russia. There was simply no other supplier. So I think there is a bit of an understanding here, even from the United States and others, that the legacy dependence of India on Russia when it comes to platforms and weapons is not something you can easily get rid of. Having said all of that, it is my sense that India will try to now diversify its relationship as much as possible, keeping in mind two things. One, Russia is at war with Ukraine, and it is at war in a way with Europe, if you like. And given this, we don't know how much Russia can really be relied upon, and so on and so forth. You have to consider it as a country which is at war. The second thing that you have to keep in mind is also that Russia has helped us in times of need. So even in the recent conflict, the 400 missile system worked pretty well. So at the end of the day, my sense is India will buy what it works best for itself. If that means having a relationship with everybody in the world, we will go ahead and do it. We will manage the relationship with all countries at the best extent possible. My sense is that the US is talking about Russian oil and not about anything else. So we will try and see how we can manage that issue. So all in all, frankly, it is my sense that India will not stray away from the policy of multi-alignment that has served us well, because it has enabled us to acquire strategic space and use that space in terms of strategic hedging.
Strategic hedging. Deepa Olapalli, sitting in Bangalore, do you get the sense when you speak to people that they feel closer to Russians, to Americans, to who?
Well, if you're giving the choice between Russians and the Americans, at this moment, I can say that there is a deep disappointment, deep sort of shock at what President Trump has been wreaking havoc on globally, but also the way in which it's affecting Indians directly. So there are a lot of tech companies here who a lot of people from here, engineers who want to go to US H-1B visas, huge effect on that. Students who are worried not just about not getting jobs once they get there, but also the climate of anti-immigrant mentality and what they see happening with ICE and so forth. I've seen a very big shift in the last year of young people saying that they really are not thinking about the United States. Now, does that translate into somehow a more favorable sentiment toward Russia? Certainly, you don't see that happening. On the other hand, there is a sense that Russia has been a longstanding friend, reliable friend that you wouldn't want to give without something else that's as solid. And I don't really see the multi-alignment is going to dictate India's policy, and I don't see it just shifting away just because, again, I just want to say that I do see this period as being rather unique, the global upheaval. And so I think we have to keep that in mind rather than make pronouncements about long-term changes, because I really am not sure that that is the case. You just saw in the Munich Security Conference, Rubio talking about the cultural affinity between Americans and Europe. There is that affinity and the special relationship that's not qualitatively different from the global South and the Western countries. And India is in the global South.
Kumar Ananta, you heard there Deepa talking about one of the essentials, which is which country makes you feel more welcome. So let me ask you, are Indians welcome in France? Or are they welcome in Europe? Is it easy to get a visa to come here?
So when you look now, of course, what is happening in the US, now you see that more and more Indian students, entrepreneurs focusing on Europe. They're not going to Russia, but they're going to Europe. They're exploring on Europe. France, of course, is welcoming more and more Indian students, entrepreneurs, facilitating.
Is it enough for you?
There are administrative issues that is not catching up with what from a political will you have, then the let's say the back end that is not following up. But the will is there, and I think welcoming Indian entrepreneurs, when you see the different states in India was done cooperation between Indo-France and the region in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and other regions. For all of them, actually, at the state level, they are corporations, welcoming students, entrepreneurs, creating incubators. So that is happening at the, let's say, at the state level between French regions and Indian regions. But the administrative part needs to speed up. I think President Macron's visit during the last visit, the ambition was set to have some thousands of students, but it has to be executed at the operation level. But that takes time. But the willingness is there. Today, I would say
the willingness is there. Shocked to discover there's bureaucracy in France. But anyway, last month, after years of slow going on trade negotiations between the European Union and India, it suddenly seemed to go into overdrive. Those common worries have been expressed by the panel over relations with the US, over tariffs, a worry that was really implicit earlier today when we heard Emmanuel Macron's remarks in Mumbai.
We believe in international trade. We reject coercive methods, and that is why the free trade agreement between India and the European Union is an important step that France strongly supports, and on which we wish to continue to move forward.
Christine, is this kind of a narrow window of opportunity for France and Europe?
Yeah, the time is really interesting because the trade deal between India and EU happened a few years after the Indian Foreign Minister was repeating criticism regarding Europe. Europe believed that its problems are world problem, but the world problem are not European problems, quote unquote, which was, of course, not totally in tune with what's happening now. So there was a turn. Now the real thing is how it can be materialized. What you said about Indian students in France, for instance. In French university, there were opposition to the government decision to make different inscription costs much higher for foreigners than for France. Or precisely, one of the big points of the French university system is that compared to many other countries, it was not costing much to be student here. So, yes, the administration and, beyond the big discourse, one has to see how the nuts and bolts are really managed. And it's not specific, of course, to the Indo-French relationship. But we have to see how all this will develop.
Mohan Kumar, it's very quickly because we're almost out of time, but there's the feeling here in Europe that there are still some that hope that it's all a bad dream and that the old Atlantic Alliance will return, and others are saying it's time to turn the page. Does India feel like superpower relations have changed for good?
No, I don't think I would rule out a rapprochement between US and EU at all, frankly. I think as far as India is concerned, we have felt, for example, even when the EU FTA happened, a lot of people in Delhi interpreted it as a direct reaction to what the US was doing. And I was at pains to point out that we needed the deal not just with the EU, but also with the US. As far as India is concerned, this is a great opportunity. Never allow a crisis to go waste. We have a great opportunity to carry out difficult economic reforms, which we have consistently put off in the past. If we can implement the EU FTA and the US FTA to be, because we have yet to sign the deal with the US, if we can do this, India will become a substantially open economy, something I have not seen in my lifetime, and I'm 68 years old. So I think that will completely change the economic landscape, not just of India, but of the global South. Because as I said right at the beginning of this show, a 4 trillion economy for 1.4 billion people seems grossly insufficient to me. We should at least be a 10 trillion economy. And if we have to do that, we cannot do it just by saying that our domestic market is big and therefore we can survive. 40% of India's GDP is actually foreign trade. So if you want to become a 10 trillion economy, you have to negotiate an FTA with Europe, which we have done. We need to trade with United States. We need the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is another entity with which we have an $100 billion trade. And we also need to actually have FTAs with Latin America and Africa. So frankly, I see this as a golden opportunity to actually set our house in order.
We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Ambassador Kumar, so many thanks for joining us from New Delhi. I want to thank Deepa Olapale for being with us from Bangalore. Kumar Ananda, Jean-Luc Racine, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.